Hi. Good morning and welcome to Journey to SCA 2024. This is your host, Shelley Ann Edwards Barron, here to talk all things narrative and reports. Now, in today's session, we're also going to be adding a little bit of report writing. I'm sorry, not report writing, poetry comprehension, because I sent out a call for questions. If anybody has any questions that I'd be able to respond to, and a few questions came back with, concerning poetry, especially like theme and mood and tone. So I want to add a few details on that today. So we'll do the reports first, as usual, then narratives, then a little bit of time is going to be spent on mood, tone, and theme where poetry is concerned. Now, I was listening to the recording at the beginning, and there was, I don't know if it was on my end alone, but it sounded kind of glitchy. So I apologize for that if that was a bit, distressing. I'm going to have to check the recording and see what happens with that. So I'll revise that for next week. For those of you who are new to the lives, this is episode, let me check, I think it's episode 21. Yeah, we're at episode 21. We started all the way back at April. So if you're new, I would advise that you go to the archives. If you are in SEA, the Peacefield Approach, the videos are in the media section. If you want, you can check my Facebook page, Word Coach Youth. The videos are there, the videos in the media section there as well. And if you want, you can view on YouTube at Word Coach Limited. That's the YouTube channel, and it would be on the live, so you can check lives, and you'd get all the previous videos. I believe there's a playlist there as well that you can get all the previous videos, and of course they are on my website, and that would be wordcoach.com, werdcoach.com, and go to Journey to SCA 2024. There's a tab labeled that, and all the videos are there, so you could go through and revise, so you don't have to only get the information directly from the live. And of course, please keep your questions coming so that I could make sure and cover what is needed. So I copied the questions onto a document so that I won't forget, to make sure I cover all that was asked so far. All right. Now we're working with, like I said, we're doing reports first and then narratives. And for reports today, what we're covering is paragraph 2, right? And remember, I'm working with a 5-paragraph structure, and that 5-paragraph structure follows the format of, let me see, I think I could type it in the comments, and then I'd be able to share it on screen so that you'd be able to follow that. So paragraph 1 would be this summary introduction, right? Paragraph 2, which is what we're dealing with today, and that would be what happens before, and I'll get into a lot of detail where that's concerned. Then we do paragraph 3, which is what we'll be covering next week, and that is what happens during. And I'm using these conjunctions, the transitions, before, during, after, so that you'd be able to follow what kind of information would go into each section. Then we have paragraph 4, which is what happened. I'm putting happens, but it's past tense, right? So it's happened immediately after. So I'll just change that one more time. And then paragraph 5 would be consequences and outcomes. Right, so that is in the chat. Some of you will be seeing it depending on where you're looking at it from, but let me just put it up on the screen so you would be able to follow that. So we have paragraph 1, that's the summary introduction that answers the question who, what, where, when. And there's a specific order that I recommend, and we looked at that last week. Then we have what happens before, and that's what we're doing today. And so you'll get a lot more detail about that. Then we have what happens during, which is what we're going to be focusing on next week. So you can check back in for that one. Then we have what happens immediately after. That would be the week after, which would be the week of October 3rd. And then finally, for paragraph 5, that would be consequences and outcome, which we would cover the following week after that, which would be October 10th. So if the content of reports is where you're having any kind of challenges, this 5-week spread would give you the introduction, paragraph 2, 3, and 4, and then paragraph 5, which would help you really understand a lot better what happens during and what goes in terms of content in a report. Now, of course, what I'm covering is I'm giving you kind of like highlights and details to assist you. If you want to get a lot more information about what is required and what can be put into the different types of reports, what I would recommend is to get my 5 reports challenge. It's a digital document series. So that means once you pay and the payment is confirmed, I email it to you, get all the information. In that series, what I do is to, let me put it from YouTube. Right, what I do is to, for each type of report, I give a paragraph by paragraph breakdown with an explanation of what kind of details you can do and include for the different types of reports. And what that is going to do is to help you do a little bit of research where each type of report is concerned, so that you and your child or you and your students, you can actually study each type of report so that you know what kind of information. Because, of course, while you can have an overall guide of what to put in each paragraph, the actual details will depend on the specific situation that the child is responding to. So, having a general idea is absolutely useful, but then the specific details you would need to really practice and go through. And so that would help quite a lot. The 5 reports series, right? 5 reports challenge is 135 is the cost. Somebody asked what the cost was. Let me put that up as well, so that if you're going through the video, you don't really have to just only check through the comments. You can actually see it on the video there. So the 5 reports challenge, 135, and I go into way more detail than I can in the time that I have during the lives, where you can get that kind of information. Because I think, right, somebody asked about narratives. I'll talk about narratives then. But in terms of reports, yeah, somebody asked, what goes into, what kind of content. So that's why I said, let me mention this up front, because this is how you would get the, specific details for each type of report. What I'm doing in this session is giving you the general idea of what is supposed to go into paragraph 2 of the report. So let's get into that now. So remember, we're talking paragraph 2, right? And so what is going on in the report so far? We have the introduction, which is paragraph 1. So readers already have a summary on, what happened, where it happened, the date and time it happened, and who was involved. So they have that general information. Now, starting with paragraph 2, the reader is expecting to get details. So the paragraph 1 is the summary, and now we're beginning the details. And what you'd notice is that we're starting with what happened before. Now, what we mean by that, when I say what happened before, we're talking about the context. And what context means is, okay, what was happening before this whole thing took place? Before the drama happened, what was going on before the drama started? And I'm saying drama, of course, but this is a report. So let me see if I could find a different way to say it so that we'd be careful with our language. The main situation, let's call it that. So the paragraph 2 begins the explanation of what happened by indicating the details and location of participants prior to what took place in the main situation. So that's the more formal report way of saying it. But so what are we talking about here? If it's an incident and let's say somebody got injured, what were they doing before the injury happened? Um, were people running around in the play field? Was there a game happening? Um, was it raining outside? What details were observed prior to the situation and the main details of that situation. So we want to know, okay, the writer is an observer, could also be a participant. Where were you? What were you doing? Where were the other people involved in the situation? What were they doing? And so you want some details around that, because one of the things that happens in a situation is that, what led up to the situation can give readers some clues about what caused the situation. So you're not telling readers this is what caused it, but you're giving them sufficient information so that they can come to their own conclusion. Remember, with a report, you are not making the conclusion for the reader, right? You are presenting the details. And then, based on your details, the reader will come to their own understanding of, hey, this is the situation. And, I think this person was responsible, or, I understand what happened and that kind of thing. So that goes primarily for like accident and incident. Now, when it comes to situations like competitions and activities and events, what happens before those things, they're a little bit different. So, when it comes to, let's say, a competition, what happens before a competition? People gather. Let's say if it's like a football finals, for example, the teams go out on the field. National anthems are played, announcements are made, different things like that would happen prior to the actual kickoff. Um, if it's like an activity, like let's say the students were given a project to do, and they have some guidelines and whatnot. What happened before would be the issuing of the project by the teacher, statement of guidelines, identifying the purpose of the project and those types of things. That's what goes into paragraph 2 if you're doing an activity. If it's like a field trip kind of activity, paragraph 2 would be, um, teachers gather students and give them rules and guidelines. This is where we're going. I expect you to be on your P's and Q's, those types of things. Um, if it is you want to talk about, heading into a situation, but certainly also in a field trip, you can talk about, okay, when you get to the destination, the tour guide gathered everybody, gave some guidelines, and started the tour. What happened during that time? Those are the kinds of things that you want to give in your paragraph 2 for the report. Let's see. In an event, especially, one of the more popular events that students are asked to write about and practice with, especially in the practice tests, has to do with, a speaker coming to the school, or the students going to meet the speaker wherever the speaker is, and there's some kind of presentation and so on. So we have that kind of event that is classified under an event. Remember, there are different types of reports, and we recognize 5 types. I've added in a sixth one, which is natural disasters, but I don't go into a whole lot of detail with that one, because based on the kinds of requests, let's see, from I think it was 2019 and 2022 were reports, or I don't know why I don't remember. I know 2019 was definitely reports for SEA. Um, Based on those, you get accidents, incidents, competitions, events, activities. Those are the main ones. So, on the off chance that a natural disaster kind of report comes, I have included information on that in the booklet series. But I believe if a student, plans and works with these 5 that I mentioned, they would be in a very good way to make a choice, and an informed choice, about what type of report they can work with in a practice test and in the exam. So, with the event, what you're looking at is, introduction of the speaker, um, and the kind of preliminaries. So let's say someone came to this school. Students would gather at the assembly hall. They would be told what the assembly is about, and they would be introduced to the speaker and state and given information about, what to expect really in the presentation, and then the speaker would take the podium and begin. And so those are the kinds of details that you would like to put, and that should be going into that paragraph 2 of the report. So what do we have so far? Incidents and accidents generally follow similar structure. Where the difference comes is in the paragraph 3, which is what we will talk about next week, how you phrase information, and in the paragraph 5, which deals with consequences and outcomes. That's where incidents and accidents mainly differ. Otherwise, the structure is very, very similar. And just in case you're wondering what's the difference between an incident and an incident is a situation where there is damage to property, loss of property, or damage to an individual, defacing of property, hurt and pain to an individual. So it might not be like physical pain, like you got like a broken leg or that kind of thing. It could be, emotional pain, being thumped by a bully, or, embarrassed or something like that. All of that would come under um, incident. And these situations are created deliberately. So somebody set out to do this. That's what an incident is all about. Accident has to do with all of those things could have happened, but it really was not done on purpose. It just kind of happened because of the sequence of how things unfolded. But nobody really tried to hurt anybody else. Nobody was trying to damage property. We were playing. That's all we were interested in, playing. But then our game caused something to break or whatever. That's an accident, right? So that's the distinction between the two. But as you could imagine, the details, especially what happens in paragraph 2, are quite similar when it comes to incidents and accidents. Because what you're doing is, where are you and how come you were in a position to observe what took place? Where were the other people, other participants? What were they doing, leading up to the situation itself? And then competitions, rules, guidelines, purpose. Well, not necessarily purpose. Purpose would really be for like activities and events. But in a competition, definitely rules and guidelines. um, and the beginning of the competition, where you would say, what participants were doing, the whole national anthem, etc., etc. And well, like I said, activities and events. We would want the purpose of the activity. What were the preliminaries? That's what they usually called. Introduction of speaker, introduction of theme, um, guidelines for anything given by the master of ceremonies and those types of things. Yeah, that would go into that paragraph. Now, of course, all of that information, remember with a report, you're being detailed, specific, and concise. So we're not looking for like, 5, 6 sentences, 8 to 10 lines necessarily. If you have that much detail to add, that is okay. Just make sure all the details relate to before the main situation of the report. And so I generally tell my students 3 to 5 sentences, because remember, we're not looking for really short sentences. We're looking for compound and complex sentences that are written in a way where you can get quite a lot of detail into one sentence. So a student doesn't have to worry about writing a whole lot. They just need to pay attention to, am I giving enough information for the person reading this report to understand the beginning of things? That's pretty much what's happening. Because when you look at it, if you look at the structure of a report, right? What is this, paragraph 2? Let me take that down. Right, right. If you look at the structure of a report, what you really have is introduction, body, conclusion, right? So the introduction is a paragraph by itself, right? So we know that's paragraph 1. And then the body of the report, that would be paragraphs 2 to 4, right? So then that would be paragraph 2, 3, and 4. That would be the body. And then what we get after that is the conclusion, which would be paragraph 5, right? So what you're looking at then is um, the body of the report has a beginning, middle, end for itself. So your report has an introduction, a body, and a conclusion, and then the body has a beginning, middle, end. So that's why we look at what happened before, what happened during, and what happened after. So paying attention to what happened before, that's like the beginning. What happened during, that's like the middle. What happened after, that's like the end. And then we step back and we look at consequences and outcomes from the whole situation. That's really how to process and think about the reports. So I think that should cover quite nicely what goes into a report. So we kind of did a little review on the 5 paragraph structure. We did specifically what goes into paragraph 2, which is what we covered today. Last week we covered paragraph 1, and next week we will do paragraph 3, and as I give you the breakdown following. So again, if you want all the information now so that you can go through it yourself, the 5 reports challenge, $135 for it. You can WhatsApp me. Let me put my contact, 7174993. And please WhatsApp, because if I'm in a class or I'm doing the live or I'm in a meeting or on a call, I won't be able to take the number, take your information. But if you want me to call you back, I can, and I can arrange at a time when I can call you back if you want to have specific questions answered. Otherwise, I could, we can correspond via WhatsApp, especially if what you want is just the the documents. Let me know. I'll give you the procedure. And the procedure is pretty simple. Payment is made, I get a screenshot, I confirm the money hits my account, you give me an email, I send the documents to you. That's pretty much how it works. But like I said, I go into a lot more detail, paragraph by paragraph, what goes into each section, some recommendations. Plus, you get a sample report for each type of report and three prompts that you could practice on your own. Right? So that's with the report writing. Um, and so let's switch now to narrative writing. And, I keep telling myself every time I come to the transition, I tell myself, I should have a little transition something so that you could kind of switch over. But it's usually around the midpoint, 30 minutes in. That's when we switch to the narratives. But okay, so we're finished with reports and let's move on to narratives. And our topic today on narratives with narratives is practicing beginning stories. Now, again, if this is your first live and this is the first time you're going through this, remember this is episode 21. And so we've covered quite a number of details already. Last week we looked at hooks in stories, and the week before that we looked at elements of stories, story introductions. So, what goes into an introduction? What kind of details do you need to include? And so at this point during this week, what I recommend is working with your child or your students, practicing the beginnings, right? So we looked at different types of hooks. We looked at how the hook is supposed to be connected and the other details. So now a student is given an opportunity, given a prompt, and have them write a full introduction. Now, the full introduction should really be the first paragraph. Depending on how the paragraphing runs, it might end up with two paragraphs, but you don't want to end up in paragraph 3 and still be dealing with the beginning of a story. The beginning of a story, and remember, we're working with flash fiction, microfiction, really tiny, very, very short story. So things have to happen kind of quickly. So you really don't want to hit paragraph 3 still explaining characters and, getting into the mood and all of that. That is reserved for longer stories. Narrative flash fiction, which is a type that your child or your students will have to be writing for SEA. If they get a narrative, things have to happen quickly. So paragraph 1, I would say within about 6 sentences, even if you put 3 sentences in one paragraph, 3 in another, by the time you hit sentence 7, you should be moving on to the first problem and not really still giving background information. Right? So that's the format, especially if you're working with the, start at the beginning and go step by step to the end kind of approach. That's the typical linear approach. If, however, you're dealing with flashback, and flashback is one of those, really awesome literary devices that you could use to, storytelling devices that you could use to get readers' interest and, make them feel excited about a story. What you want to do with a flashback, of course, flashback means starting in the midst of the excitement, explaining what's happening, and then you go back to the beginning. That's why we call flashback, because then you have to go back to the beginning and tell readers how you got to that point. There are a couple of things to note with that. The number one thing is, while your flashback is part of it becomes your introduction when you're using that format. The idea is that you still have to give the details required for an introduction in that flashback. Where are you? Why are you where you are? Who are the main characters? And what do you want? What does the main character want? You absolutely still have to do all of those things for an introduction whether you're working with flashback or not. And so flashback is something that I teach my students. And this term, I'll be reviewing it again with the Standard 5 group. With the Standard 4 group, we meet on a Thursday at 5 o'clock. What I'll be doing is like foundation, because there's a lot that a student has to understand before they get to being able to use a flashback effectively. It's not as simple as, just starting in the midst and then going back. Some students get it quickly, but not all students do. So most certainly you'd have to understand, okay, what do we mean by a character's goal? What kind of details can I give for character description and setting description? How many details do I need to give? What does the introduction look like? Practice the different types of hooks. All of those things are done at the introductory level, which is what I teach for the Standard 4s. Standard 5s, we are preparing for the exam. We're in exam preparation mode. So we are touching on specific skills that would help students really master the narrative writing that they would need to do. And let me check. One of the questions that I got regarding narrative writing, and which is really interesting to me, I think I got like 5 questions, and 3 out of the 5 questions had to do with poetry, which is why I decided I'm going to add in some information on poetry today. But in any case, what are the main things the examiner is looking for in the narrative essay? But specifically like content. Now, when it comes to content of a story, because a narrative essay is a story with a main idea and a point, like a lesson learned. That's what narratives are. Now, it depends on the type of story, which is why I teach my students types of stories and what we call subgenre, right? Fiction is the genre, just like poetry is genre, drama is genre, nonfiction is genre. Fiction is the genre, and then we have the subgenre, which would be subcategories, right? I mean, it's like, sounds like a fancy term, but once you know, it just means the categories of stories. There are quite a few, but I recommend students know 7 of them, right? So fiction is a type of writing, and then which is a storytelling kind, and then the subgenre. I'm going to list the ones that I teach my students and make sure they kind of understand. So we have science fiction, mystery, thriller, and suspense. I group. Um, we have realistic fiction, which is what most students tend to gravitate to, right? Then we have folklore and fairy tale. I wonder if all of them would fit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have fantasy, and then I also group action and adventure. Right now, action could be one by itself, adventure could be one by itself, thriller is also by itself, suspense, you can call that by itself, but that's when you're kind of like really getting into the, oh, yes, it all fit on the screen. Nicely done. That's when you're really getting into, fine nuances of storytelling, which not absolutely necessary for standard 5 student to really get into. So that's why I grouped it. So science fiction, mystery, thriller and suspense, realistic fiction, folklore and fairy tale, fantasy, action and adventure. 7 of them. So if you're wondering what kind of information goes into a story, you really need to think about 2 things. One would be the plot of the story, and what subgenre the student is writing, right? Um, so I'm going to put that up so that you would have that idea, right? So if you're concerned about, okay, is my child or my students writing the sufficient content? Are they writing the right type of content in a story? Then we need to pay attention to plot and subgenre. Now, I went into detail about plot. We looked at the different elements of plot, um, the rising action, and all those things. That actually is kind of like the foundation or the structure of the story. So, following plot, that is majorly important because that guides the content. And then you look at the subgenre, which also influences the content. For example, if you're dealing with mysteries, then you're writing a story where somebody is following clues to uncover, uncover the mystery, to get answers. If you are writing science fiction, then science fiction requires certain types of elements. We want some aliens or some kind of chemical, something, or technology. That is what you would have to write. If you're writing a realistic fiction, what happens in that has to be something that can actually happen in real life. So if it can't be too fantastical because that's where fantasy comes in. So if a student understands these different subgenre, then they would know what to write in the content of the story. And it really is a matter of sort of like expanding the students' thinking so that they would understand, okay, I could write a science fiction. And in my science fiction, I could have aliens, I could have visits to other planets. I could do these things because it's a science fiction. If I'm talking fantasy, my dog could answer me. You know, I saw a prompt the other day. You were um, making slime, and the slime started to move by itself. Now, that's a basic prompt. A child could go anywhere. Now, I know with a prompt like that, people are thinking, okay, science fiction, it's moving, so therefore we have some otherworldly kind of chemical, maybe it'll start to talk to us. That is absolutely perfectly fine. But guess what? You can also write a realistic fiction with that. If it's moving by itself, maybe there's a bug in it that's causing it to move, or some kind of, typical chemical reaction that the child probably didn't know about at the time. And so you could write any type of story from any type of prompt. And that is something that I teach my students how to navigate that, because the idea is that as the writer, the child gets to choose, and you empower yourself and you empower students. They choose what they want to write about, and they are in control of what they share. And therefore, if they study the 12-point plot development to know what goes into the plot, and they are aware of the different types of stories so that they can have ideas in terms of content and details, then they can decide, I am going to write this kind of story or not. And that allows them to kind of plan ahead. And they would also be able to remember, I saw a program on this and it was a mystery and this is what happened. So I could use those details. I, I looked at the, a program and it was a science fiction and this is what happened. So I could use some of those details. And that's how students are able to pull information. And so while you are beginning stories and you're beginning practice with the introduction and the beginning of the story, have your children think about how is the beginning going to look different for a mystery, for a thriller, for realistic fiction, for folklore. And so you can practice this so they can begin to really see how the different type of story, the different subgenre affects the information included, and they practice their beginnings to make all types interesting, right? So that's what I would recommend. So at this point, the student would already know what goes into a beginning, what a good hook looks like. So now we're practicing the at least the first paragraph, right? And we're looking at it from the perspective of subgenre so that students can get the idea of, if it's a science fiction, what would get readers' attention in a science fiction. Um, and then they can study that, get some ideas. If it's a realistic fiction, what can I say that will get readers' attention? And so they could really practice that. So there are 7 types of stories. I think if you do one type a day, 3 different prompts, practice thriller, practice mystery, practice science fiction, you could do it like that. Or you can do maybe one prompt, 3 different subgenre. Today, next day, same prompt, 3 different subgenre, and then the third day, the 7th one, and then you could review the others and see which one worked best and all those types of things. So that's what you're doing this week when you're practicing narratives. And I think if you put aside like 3 hours over the course of the week to practice these things, then that would really give the information. So you're not just really looking at this point writing complete narratives. We're not writing complete narratives yet. We're not writing complete reports yet. We're still making sure students are doing the different pieces. Now, this, of course, is primarily for home use because at school, many teachers are already combining and students are writing full pieces. So you don't necessarily have to have your child at home also writing full pieces. You can have them exploring the pieces that they're doing at school. If they're not writing anything at school just yet, because I know some students are challenged with the math and the ELA, and so many teachers are really focused on those things, then you work on the subgenre, you work on the introductions, make sure that's clear. So look at the imagery, look at the descriptions, character descriptions, setting description, etc. You're practicing those things as they relate to the beginning of the story. And well, as for reports, I didn't mention this earlier, but this week, of course, for reports, you are practicing the what comes before. So you might want to have 5 different prompts, one of each type of story, type of report, sorry, and have the child write the introduction and paragraph 2. So we're doing paragraph 1 and 2 for 5 different prompts so that A, we're practicing the introduction, which we've already done, and B, we're getting the hang of the paragraph 2, which is what we're working on now, and 3, ABC, 1, 2, 3, I can't remember. You can practice transitions, how to begin the paragraph 2. There are lots of different phrases, prior to, before, etc. So you want to practice those. What kind of transition comes at the beginning of paragraph 2? So that's what you're working with for reports. And with narratives, you're working on the beginning of the story, which should be your hook plus your context according to the 12-point plot development. And just as with the report series, I have one for narratives, which I call the 7 Stories Challenge. And that one is 145. You get, for each of the 7 stories, 7 subgenre that I showed you earlier. So you get a booklet on science fiction, which comes with a sample story, an understanding of what science fiction is and what kind of details would go into a good science fiction, plus 3 prompts that you can practice. And then you would get the same for mystery, thriller and suspense, realistic fiction, folklore and fairy tale, fantasy, action and adventure. So those are the basic 7 documents. And you would also get a document on, vivid description, character development, how to analyze a story prompt, because that makes a difference. Are you writing first person or third person? That's something to pay attention to. So all of these things come in that booklet series. So if you don't already have a copy, it's a good idea to get a copy, because as I'm talking and I mentioned, let's say, for example, if you have a copy and you are practicing beginning stories, then what I would recommend is, so you go through the booklets, you have 7 of them, and you read the introductions for each of the sample stories, and you look at how each story began. You take one day, you read all of them, you analyze them, you discuss that with your child. And then the next day, you have 3 prompts at the back of each within each booklet for each type of story. So then you go through and you select one of the prompts, and you go through some of the planning to get the ideas, and you look at, monitoring. And there are some details on the 12 point. There's a separate booklet. The introductory booklet actually has a lot of information about the 12-point plot development, including a worksheet to help you deal with that. And then so you use the booklets in that way. And so the booklets would help you throughout the term. And I know working with your own children is sometimes a little bit challenging, because, yeah, I mean, for those of you who know, and those of you who don't, that's the whole reason I got into this whole situation of sharing all of these things. Because when my daughter was doing SCA, I kind of caught it a bit late, but she really was struggling. And in order to help her, I had to start a class and make her one of the students, because me telling her by myself, that was a whole thing, which is another reason I created these documents. Because if you have the documents and you can show it to your child and say, okay, this is what we're working on, it's very different from you just saying, hey, do this and do that. You have, okay, here's the text, here's some material, here's a guideline. Let's take a look at this. We could review it. And then you have a more healthy discussion, as opposed to, trying to get to your child just by sharing details. So I think in that way it would be, pretty helpful. So, all right. So that is closing off from narratives. I think that's what would really help you when narratives are concerned. And so you have your notes on reports. Now let's get to poetry, and we're specifically looking at theme, mood, and tone, because I believe those are the bulk of the questions that I got. Let me just review the questions, because I want to make sure I'm answering specifically those questions. Um, so we're talking about tone and mood, and what words would help identify mood and tone. We're talking about, I did get a question on graphics, but I'll have to deal with that in another session. I think we'll just stick to poetry today. Um, right. So we're looking at literary devices, character description. Okay. So I think I answered most of the questions where the creative writing is concerned, especially for narratives. So the main question for poetry was mood and tone. All right, and theme. I think I saw like 2 references to theme. So let's start with an understanding of exactly what a theme is. Now, it sounds like a fancy word, because we don't kind of use that in regular language, but you're really answering the question, what is this poem really about? Right? So if somebody asks you, you read something, now theme applies to all fiction writing. So you can get the theme of you can get a theme of a story, you can get a theme of poetry. Um, Technically, it also applies to nonfiction, but instead of the word theme, we use different words, like main idea and those kinds of things. But it's generally the same. So, what is this really about? So, you read the poem and you want to find out, what is the poem actually about? What is the writer sharing? And so, then this brings up another question. When it comes to poetry and understanding poetry effectively, readers need to understand something very important, right? In a poem, what you have is a writer sharing an idea about a topic in a descriptive and emotional way, right? So that's pretty much what a poem is. It's a writer sharing their opinions and feelings about a topic, sharing their ideas about a topic in an emotional way. And it's very descriptive, which is why poems use what we call lots of literary devices. So there's imagery, figurative language, similes, metaphors, and they have irony, we have idioms, and many different kinds of literary devices and figurative language that we can use. And in addition to some of those things which most people are familiar with, poems are different in the sense, different from other writing, like different from prose. That's what we would call a story. It's different because poems use rhythm, rhyme, and oh, what's the other one? I'll tell you in a bit. There are like three things that are in addition to what like the language itself. There are three unique things to, right? So, right, rhythm, rhyme, and well, I guess how do I put this? It's the sentencing, the lines, the punctuation is used differently from the way a narrative where you would have a sentence going and you continue. Poems, you go and you stop and then you start a new line. I'll call it sentencing. Well, that sounds kind of ominous. uh Line, let's call it line arrangement. That might be a better way to say it. Right? So we're calling it line arrangement. And so, in addition to the idea in terms of the words, we also have to pay attention to these things. And now, what does all of that have to do with theme and mood? Well, I'll tell you. The way the words are arranged in the poem usually guides readers to focus on one or more sections, and they guide the way the information is received. And all of these things work toward mood and tone. So the arrangement works toward mood and tone, the rhythm, the rhyming works toward mood and tone, and the content, the descriptions and the literary devices otherwise and so on, that helps you with the theme. So to back up, one, theme has to do with theme has to do with what is the poem actually about? What's the writer trying to tell me? Are they talking about love and, um, feeling love, appreciation for something? Are they talking about something that they like and they're reminiscing and they're talking about their childhood? Are they making statements about, the state of the world? Like there was a poem, I think, in one of the practice tests or previous exams that I saw that spoke about trees, and the tree was, I think it was a practice test. The tree was lamenting, I give you all of these things. I give you food, I give you shade, I give you wood to make your furniture and your houses, and then you cut me down? It's like, what? So, so what's the theme in that poem? Well, it is about deforestation. That's the topic, and from the perspective of the tree. What's the mood? I don't remember the words and so on right now, so I wouldn't be able to give you exactly mood and tone. But mood and tone, you can talk about. Okay, is it hopeful? Is it depressed? So the writer could be sharing, some sadness about the situation, and therefore that sadness is going to impact on the reader. So what happens when you look at the mood and the tone, um, is really pretty much about emotions, but from two sides. So we have the writer's side, that would be tone, and then from the reader's side, that would be mood. But it's all about emotions. So from the writer's side, which is the tone, how does the writer feel about what it is they're sharing? So, and we know this by the words the writer uses. So if he talks about, there was another poem about a giant's haircut. I think that was a past paper, one of the ELA exams, SE exams. Um, that one uses words like hacking and chopping and very active, kind of violent words. And so based on that, you can ask yourself, okay, how does the writer feel about what's going on here? Well, they're very, energetic, and they feel excited, maybe because of the words that were used. um, if you're talking about that, you have that from the writer's perspective. And then what about the mood? Mood would be from the reader's perspective. Same information in terms of feelings, but feelings from the reader's perspective. So how does the poem make you feel as a reader? um, the writer could be writing something serious, but then based on your own personal experiences and the way you think about it, you might feel, in a good mood. Is humorous. It makes you feel lighthearted because it's funny. A giant getting a haircut, and as a normal person having um, to cut the hair, and he has to like get lifted by a helicopter. I mean, just picturing that, you'd be like, wow, So you could feel in awe of the whole situation as the reader. And how do you know that? Well, these are the things in the poem that give me this feeling. So, mood and tone are all about feelings, but from two different perspectives. One from the writer's perspective, one from the reader's perspective. And the main thing to remember with mood and tone is that you have to answer this question: what in the poem triggers these feelings? So whether you're talking writer's feelings or the reader's feelings, you must have a reason for it. So you read it and it makes you laugh, and you say, yeah, it's funny, it made me laugh. Okay, what about it made you laugh? What about it was funny? Why was it funny to you? You have to give evidence and a reason for your answer. So those are the things that you would need to practice with poetry. And so what I would recommend is, like going through poems and obviously really considering making sure students recognize there's a writer and there's a reader. There are two people involved. And so you don't have to agree with what the writer says. And the writer could be telling you things that you don't quite follow. Maybe the whole poem is confusing because one minute the writer is saying this, the other minute he's saying that. What's going on? When I read this poem, I was thoroughly confused. It happens. But then you have to be able to explain. It's not just a matter of saying, this is how I feel. What words in the poem triggered you? What caused you to feel that way? There must be a reason. And that's the big thing with mood and tone. So, all right. So with the poetry, what did I share that based on the questions that I got that I think you need to remember? One theme has to do with what is this poem really about? Sometimes you can read a poem and immediately you understand what it's about. Sometimes you have to do what we call read between the lines in order to figure out what it's about. Um, so that's why you have a question of mood and tone. Many of the poems our students use are pretty obvious. And so, you can tell how the writer feels. Mood is personal, so each student might feel differently. But then, there are specific clues because the writer isn't just writing to give their perspective. With poetry and fiction, writers write to make readers feel a certain way. So writers use specific words to get readers to feel sad, to get readers to feel happy, to get readers to feel angry about something. And which is why your decision about whatever mood and tone that you choose has to be based on the information given in the piece of writing that you're reviewing. So poetry, because of the type of writing it is, every word is carefully selected, whether intentionally by the writer or some writers claim that they just write based on their muse and what feeling comes to them. It is carefully selected to create mood, create tone, to make a statement. Even more so than fiction, because of how short poems generally are, you have to be really, really selective on your word choice, which is why making sure that everything you say about a poem doesn't matter how you feel, doesn't matter what you think about how the writer feels. What's your evidence? Where do you get that from? What's the trigger? What's the word that helps you? And so, identifying these words, we're looking at what we call content words and descriptive words. So, we're looking at nouns and verbs, and we're looking at adverbs and adjectives. Right? So, these are the words that really give you the meaning in the poem. Nouns and verbs. Nouns will tell you who, the verbs will tell you what action, um, and then the descriptions of those where we get the adjectives and adverbs. Those are some of the keywords that you would look for to help you identify the mood and the tone, as well as to figure out what is this really about. All right, so I think I could close it off there. I feel like that is a good way to start you off. Um, at this point in time, I don't have resources that I can share with you that you can help you practice with this. I'm working on it. So as soon as they're ready, I'm going to share. But for now, I think any poem, practice tests have poems and so on. Even outside of working on the questions, you might want to have discussions with your child or your student about the poem, and make sure they understand the difference between the writer's perspective and the reader's perspective, as well as being able to figure out what the poem is actually about. I have a colleague who wrote a book on poetry, well, a poetry volume. There are lots of local writers with some really amazing poetry books. The one that I contributed to, in the sense of I helped my friend edit the book. Um, it's called Poetry, and he also did I Am the Tree. Right, those are the two titles. You can, do a search. His name is Kieron Isaac. Right, I Am the Tree and Poetry. Let me put his name up as well. Um, yeah, you could just do a search on Facebook. I am the poetry. I think that's his page, poetry, and you'd get all the information. And he also has it in bookstores. I know it's in Academics Plus. I know it's in Scribbles and Quills. There are a couple others that I don't remember off the top of my head, but I recommend getting a book of poetry and just going through poems and reading them, asking questions, discussing it. It's not always about putting things down on paper. We have to process it up here before we get to the putting it down on paper. So these are the things that I would recommend. In terms of, I do have a course on descriptive writing and comprehension. It is really, I created it primarily for standard 3 students because that's where you really want to begin working on these things. But standard 4 students, because it's a year program, there are like 33 average lessons in it. And I do this online. So this term, and actually class is starting today, 5 o'clock this evening. This term, we're looking at visual imagery and how that helps with graphics. So if you're having challenges with graphics, that could work really well, because many times we assume that with comprehension is really about what you're reading and then answering the questions. But there's a lot of processing that has to go into the reading, making connections with the descriptive language, understanding the descriptive language, being able to recognize it when you see it. These are the foundation concepts. So drilling comprehension is not necessarily the way to improve comprehension skills. We really have to understand certain things. So if your child is in standard 4, or you know somebody who's in standard 4 or standard 3, who would benefit from that comprehension course, let me know, message me, and so on. The course is starting today. Sessions are being recorded, so if they happen to miss today, they would get the recording and the materials associated with it. But it's about helping students think creatively and think critically about what they're reading and what they're writing. And there's a foundation for that. And that's the foundation that I do in that exploring imagery program. For the standard 5 students, in my one-on-one classes, we do the drills and I do fill in as much as I can within the time frame. But I really do recommend starting this at standard 3 so that you have the time to explore and to develop and to really get into that critical and creative thinking. If you're at standard 4, it's not too late. It's a year program. It's still going to give you a foundation. If you're at standard 5, then you're really in exam mode. So there's a lot that can be done, but it has to be done specifically within the context of the exam, so that you can meet those needs. Right? So, all right, 12, 14. Ooh, I went over a little bit longer than I normally do. That's because of the addition of the comprehension, but I think now is a good time for wrapping it up. And for those of you who were able to stick it out, I mean, thank you so much for your attention, and for your time. Time is precious. I hope this session was valuable, um, and that you got the details that you needed. And please remember, if I didn't answer something that you want to get answered, please send me a question, WhatsApp, let me know. I think the cost of the program, how could I forget that? So the name of the program is Exploring Imagery. It meets Tuesdays at 5 p.m. and cost is $850 for the term. And so you get 11 sessions plus the recordings and the materials, for that cost. And what we do in that program is that we explore the different types of imagery, and I take it both from a writer's perspective as well as from the reader's perspective. Because when it comes to writing, there are at least two people involved. We have a writer and we have a reader. And so when students understand it from the writer's perspective, their narratives get better. When they understand it from the reader's perspective, their comprehension gets better. So the program is spread out over 3 terms. So this term, January term, and then April term. And each term we focus on a different aspect of the comprehension and the writing. So first term, we look at visual imagery, specifically for the case of graphics. We go into detail with graphics, different types of graphics, and how would I be able to identify the type that you're looking at, what the images mean, and so on. And then we do some poetry. Next term, we get more into the fiction and nonfiction type of writing, inferential questions, etc. And then third term, we focus a lot more on the poetry again, and we kind of bring everything together. So, so that's it. Thank you again for the attention, for your questions, for the engagement. Please message, WhatsApp, email. If you need to contact me by email, I can share the email as well. And so I'll see you next week. Next week, I'll try to touch on graphics, where the comprehension is concerned. I think I could give you a few pointers on that, for next week. So thank you for your attention. I'm going to just end it without playing the ending video, because I think it wasn't playing properly and I don't want to jar your senses. So I'll fix it, and next week we will go back to the typical the typical ending. All right, so bye bye. Have a wonderful rest of today, and I'll see you next week.